Bismillah. So, admit everyone. Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome. I'm just going to admit everyone in, and then I'm going to hand it over to the host of our session, Ayesha, Syed. So just going to admit everyone. It is being recorded, folks. So if you left your email address with us, registered, you will get the link to see it if you didn't want to see, if you can't stay till the end. Right. Okay. So I think we've got more as people. I'll add them as they come in. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome. Welcome to the Islamic Courses session on Pakistan today. What would Allama Iqbal think? I would like to thank our panelists here. We're privileged to have Allama Mian Iqbal Salahuddin, who's the grandson of Allama Iqbal, president of the Dabistan-e-Iqbal, Pakistan. We have Professor Iftikhar Malik from University of Bath, who's the author of the History of Pakistan. And we have Brother Murtaza Shibli, who's a Kashmiri journalist. And our host for this session is Sister Ayesha, Syed, who's the chairperson of the International Muslim Women Pakistan chapter. Just a reminder, Ayesha's going to introduce the subject and the format and whole session really. It's going to be a different format from our usual sessions, but for security reasons, leave your full name so we can see you on entry. A kind reminder, keep your phones, devices on mute. It is being recorded. If you're not registered, leave your email address on the chat. And there is an extended Q&A session as well. It's going to probably go over an hour because of the importance of the subject and the heatedness. So trying, folks, just try and keep it cool, have some water, and enjoy the show. So without further ado, hand it over to Sister Ayesha. Bismillah, Ayesha.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone's fine. We are celebrating Independence Day in Pakistan today. So I extend celebrations and best wishes to all of you around the world. The topic of our discussion today is Pakistan today. What would Allama Iqbal think? And when we talk about Pakistan, there are many things that come to our minds depending on which part of the world you're sitting in. You might have your different perceptions regarding Pakistan. But Pakistan is a very unique case study. It is a very different sort of a country. It is the only nuclear power in the Islamic world. And Pakistan has 4 seasons. It has natural landscapes that surpass any other country in the world, or they can at least compare with that. It has a huge resource of natural resources, minerals and oil reserves, natural gas. It has a salt mine. It has mountain ranges. It is an absolutely fabulous country. And what makes it more unique is that this country was formed on the basis of an ideology. This country was formed on the basis of people demanding their rights for a Muslim state. And for this reason, it is compared to the state of Medina, because it is suggested that after the state of Medina, after the Islamic state of Medina, this is a one-of-a-kind state that was built or created in the name of Islam. So this session today is very important, and it is dedicated to its founding fathers, the people who gave us the vision, who gave us the dream, and also those who helped build this dream into a reality. So I'm going to start with a few verses from Allama Iqbal myself, and then I'm going to request Mian Iqbal Salahuddin Sahab to do the honors with some poems or verses from Allama's Kalam. ए रूहे मोहम्मद शिराज़ा हुआ मिल्लत मरहूम का अबतर, अब तू ही बता तेरा मुसलमान किधर जाए। वो लज्जते आशोब नहीं बहरे अरब में, पोशीदा जो है मुझ में वो तूफान किधर जाए। इस राज को अब फाश कर ए रूहे मोहम्मद, आयाते इलाही का निगहबान किधर जाए। So with these opening sentences, I would like to request Mian Iqbal Salahuddin Sahab, who is the grandson of Allama Iqbal, who is a founder and CEO of Dabistan-e-Iqbal. It's an intellectual research-based organization that is doing a lot of research on Allama's work.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Ayesha. I've selected this poem from Iqbal's book, the Zabur-e-Ajam, and मैं आपको पेश करता हूँ। ये फारसी में है। ख़ावर के आसमान पर कमंदे ख़याल उस्त, از خیشتن گسسته و بی سوز آرزوست. در تیر خاک او تب و تاب حیات نیست. جولان ماجرا نگران از کنار جوست. بتخانه و حرم همه افسرد آتشی. پیر مغان شراب هوا خورده در سبوست. فکر فرنگ پیش مجاز آورد سجود. بینای کور و مست تماشای رنگ و بوست. گردنده طرز چرخ و روایند طرز مرگ. از دست او به دامن ما چاک بیرفوست. خاکی نهاد و خوز سپهر کهن گرفت. ایار و بیمدار و کلانکار و توبتوست. مشرق خراب و مغرب از آن بیشتر خراب. عالم تمام مرده و بی ذوق جستجوست. ساقی بیار باده و بزم شبان ساز. ما را خراب یک نگه مهرمان ساز. Should I recite the translation as well?
Yes, please.
So Allama is saying in this poem that the people of the East capture the skies with their imagination, unaware of their true potential, and devoid of desire. In the darkness of their existence, there is no spark of life. They behold the tumultuous river only from its banks. The fire of Ishq is dead in the Kaaba and the temple. The cupbearer's wine has lost its flavor. The West, with all its wisdom and intellect, bows only towards the earthly existence, blinded and intoxicated by the visible only. East, fast in their movement, worse than death is the outcome of their actions. They have caused irreparable damage to other nations. Like us, made of clay, yet unpredictable like the skies, fate, swindlers, unreliable, cunning, and hypocritical. The East has decayed, but the West is worst. It's like the whole world is dead, devoid of any desire to seek reality. Oh God, serve us the wine of your love, grant us your loving glance, and guide us towards your direction.
Thank you very much. These are very beautiful opening lines, and I think they set the tone for our program as well. So I'd like to come towards Professor Iftikhar Saab. I would like to introduce him first. Professor Iftikhar Malik, University of Bath, UK, and he has been teaching modern history at the university since 1995. During the early 90s, Professor Malik held the Qaid-e-Azam chair at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, and since 2002 has been a member of the Common Room at Wolfson College, Oxford. With doctoral and postdoctoral training at Michigan State, Columbia, and UC Berkeley, Professor Malik has authored 17 books, several chapters, 75 scholarly papers, and 250 review articles. So some of Professor Malik's recent volumes include Pashtun Identity and Geopolitics in Southwest Asia, Pakistan and Afghanistan since 9/11, Pakistan, Democracy, Terror, and the Building of a Nation, and the History of Pakistan. So some more amazing books and so many articles and so much academic research. We have a repository of knowledge with us today. So Professor Malik, I welcome you to this platform, and I would like to start with you. We are here celebrating 73rd Independence Day of Pakistan, and still we are seeing debates and confusion regarding the very ideology of Pakistan, perhaps, regarding the reason for its formation. And there's so many things that we have not been able to achieve even clarity upon, much less that they have been worked upon or not. That's another question. So I want to ask you that did Allama Iqbal truly have a vision for Pakistan, or was it just a response to colonialism?
Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and thank you very much for a very extensive introduction. It's a wonderful day. It's Pakistan's Independence Day, and I don't want to start it by moaning and making it into a mourning day. I think it's a day of celebration, but as you said, it is also a day of recapitulation of what has gone wrong, or where we could have taken a different route, or still, we could learn from our past, from our history. I look at Allama Iqbal in a very sort of universal cosmopolitan context, and I'll come back to that. I think Dr. Iqbal was not just confined to one territorial identity, and he was against the idea of territorial nationalism. As a philosopher, he was trying to marry religion, politics, and science. And also he was trying to find something in between modernity and tradition. So he is a modern philosopher, and maybe the first modern philosopher of Islam. And Iqbal Salahuddin has read a beautiful poem. Most of Allama Sahab's poetry is in Farsi, and then his lectures, 7 lectures, 6 in India in the 1930s, and 1 that he delivered here in Britain. And he talks about all these subjects, and that is where you see Allama Iqbal as an intellectual, as a thinker, as a writer. And I think it's unfair to Allama Iqbal, to the stature of Allama Iqbal, to confine him to one particular, territory. Recently, I was reading a thesis which was done at McGill University in Canada, in Montreal. And it talks about Dr. Shariati and how Shariati was influenced by Allama Iqbal. And I witnessed it myself when I visited Iran. And it's not because of just Persian poetry, but the ideas and the vision and the confidence that he wanted to create amongst Muslims by bringing in all kinds of symbols, including history of the past, Muslim past. So I witnessed that in Central Asia, where Allama Iqbal is becoming very popular again because all these 6, 7 republics are rediscovering their roots. And they discovered this root, what American historian Marshall Hyson called, Persianate or Islamicate. And more recently, Harvard's Professor Shahab Ahmad Marhum called it Bosnia to Bengal, identity. So Iqbal's field was very vast. So he should not be confined to just the subcontinent or Indus Valley. I think Iqbal was talking about larger issues. So what did he think of Pakistan? And I recently read Doris Ahmed's book, and I would invite you to read that because this German lady looked after the mother of Mian Iqbal Salahuddin and Iqbal Salahuddin's marhum uncle, Dr. Javed Iqbal. And she saw Allama Iqbal during the last 3-4 years of his life, a very humble, down-to-earth, honest family man. And in one of his, humorous moments, he said, look, these people are calling me about this state that, they are attributing to me the territorial state. And, but you're right, because some of these people, even in his lifetime, thought that after his address at Allahabad, when he was the president of Muslim League for that session in 1930, perhaps that is where he talked of a Muslim polity, which will sort of guarantee a kind of political redefinition of Muslim majority areas, though he did not, include Bengal. But anyway, I think Iqbal had a vision of a Muslim world in a larger context, where you will have several Muslim states decolonized. So he is a liberationist kind of philosopher who felt that Islam should not be confined just to ritualism. Or same way, he's very critical of ulama, the mullah, and he's very critical of peers, though he's not critical of mysticism because he grew up in a family which had powerful mystical tradition. His father Nur Muhammad was a Sufi, and his great-grandfather was a Sufi in Kashmir. So Allama Iqbal was not against mysticism, but he felt that mysticism had degenerated into rituals, into superstitions. And so he was very much against it. And he was also against reducing Islam to few practices and a kind of dogma. So I think he was trying to suggest several things to empower Muslims, to make them rethink about their history, about their religion, about Sufism, about their spiritual needs, and also about their political needs. In Pakistan, and I'm sure in Kashmir and our adjoining area, we mostly focus on two things in reference to Allama Iqbal. His poetry, which we mostly read in Urdu because sadly Persian has disappeared. And number two, we talk about his politics. And we don't go beyond that. I think I would invite people here, the younger lot, that they should look at Iqbal as a philosopher and the issues that he raised. At one level, he thinks Islam or Islamic civilization is part of global civilization. And European civilization is part of this global civilization. So we should have no confrontation with it. At another level, he feels that science, religion, and Islamic traditions, they could all come together and we could recreate the kind of humanity. So Iqbal was living in a very challenging time. If you look at the subcontinent, there were missionaries who were writing about Islam and Hinduism. There was a competition between Hindus and other communities. There was Arya Samaj in his native Punjab. And he also saw the Unionist Party, which was the party of the landlords. And he, being a man of peasants, farmers, poor people, he stood against feudalism. Through his dress, very informal when it came to his clothing, using Punjabi, eating Desi Punjabi food, he wanted to flag the indigenous nature of the cultures of the subcontinent, and especially Muslims of the Indus Valley. So I think we should see Iqbal in a global context, in a philosophical context, and not just in a political context. We should not reduce this thinker to the role of a political thinker, that he suggested these few things, and if we didn't do those things, we have lost our way. Iqbal definitely wanted Muslims to be empowered through education, through thinking, through political reorganization, and most of all through ijtihad, that according to the times, you face the challenges, confront them. And then he also talked about, parliamentary system, the republicanism. So I think when we look back over the last 73 years, the few things which really hurt all of us, the friends of Pakistan or Pakistanis or students of Iqbal. Number one, republicanism. Democracy properly did not develop in Pakistan. It was always hijacked. And number two, we did not see the dwindling of that kind of Islam, which has become dogmatic and superstitious. We call it Mullaism or Piri Fakiri. And number three, the violence. 1971, we saw violence between East Pakistan and West Pakistan, which was unneeded, which could have been avoided. And number four, the violence that has been committed in the name of Islam in the last 15, 20 years, where thousands of Pakistanis, Afghans, and many other people have lost lives. But at the same time, I think if Iqbal's ruh or spirit is watching us, he would be appreciative of the resilience of the people of this region who have suffered so much, who started from a zero infrastructure, who had the world's largest migration, who had a very difficult neighborhood, and who survived all these earthquakes and floods and poverty. And still the country is there, and still we are talking about these issues. So at one level, I don't want to make it into something to mourn, but I think, as I said at the beginning, Iqbal and Pakistan, Iqbal and the Muslim world, Iqbal and modernity, Iqbal as a philosopher. These are the areas which could invite us to think about all kinds of things that we could have done and we could still do. And that is where the responsibility lies on the shoulder of those people who read Iqbal or who teach in these hundreds of universities and colleges which are spread all over Pakistan. And I include Bangladesh in it, Bangladesh became Bangladesh because it was largely because it was Pakistan. It was part of Pakistan in 1947. So Bangladeshis or East Pakistanis benefited from whatever these founding fathers of Muslim India were suggesting and struggling for in the 1920s and in the 1930s. But we could come back to some of those issues and how recently, a PhD thesis has been done is still on the politics of Allama Iqbal, on the political philosophy of Allama Iqbal. But I think Iqbal is a larger person. And I think this is where he invites us to look at him. And many people think he is the architect of revolutionary changes in societies in Central Asia and in Iran. And I have seen lots of fondness for Iqbal in Turkey, in Konya especially, because of Maulana Rum and because of Iqbal's special association with Maulana Rum. People in Konya, they're writing books, and recently there have been a couple of PhD dissertations by Turkish scholars on Allama Iqbal.
Thank you very much for this very elaborate answer. And of course, we need to look at Iqbal in a very holistic perspective. But right now, what we're trying to do is contextualize Iqbal's philosophy or his vision for the subcontinent, because we are sitting in Pakistan and discussing Pakistan today. And the format of our program today is different from the usual format that is followed, in which each speaker is allowed a specific time and then we open the house for question and answers. This is going to be a question answer session, and different speakers will be answering the questions as per their areas of interest. So I would like to move on to Mr. Murtaza Shibli, who is a British Kashmiri journalist, and he's an author and a commentator. He was born in Srinagar, Indian administered Kashmir. He has a wide experience of living and working in the 3 countries, and as well as Asia, Africa, and Europe, in different roles in managing communication portfolios, including the United Nations. He has a master's degree, each in journalism and mass communication, and violence, conflict, and development from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, UK. He's a recipient of Chevening Scholarship, Ummah Media Scholarship, and is a gold medalist and a first position holder in the Faculty of Social Sciences. He has also received the Ambassador of Peace Award. Currently, Murtaza writes for The Telegraph, fourth largest Indian daily, and an opinion column for The Jung and News Daily in Pakistan. Previously, he has written for the UK-based newspapers like The Guardian, The Telegraph, The New Internationalist, and The Eastern Eye. He has also authored a well-received book on the London bombings, Muslim Perspective 77, that has received rave reviews across Europe. So what a diverse personality, Mr. Murtaza. I must congratulate you on that. And I also too find it difficult which side of your personality to address first. So you will have to decide what side will be answering. I will just pose the question and you will see. Coming back to Iqbal's vision of Pakistan. Sitting today, 73 years after independence, again, I'd like also not to be a pessimist. I'd like to promote optimism, and I'd like to sit here and reflect today. This is a time for self-analysis. This is a time for self-reflection. And COVID has given us the pause that we needed to make our brains think and come out of the daily routines. So I would like to know, how well have we lived up to the dream that Allama Iqbal presented in his vision, not just in his Allahabad address, but in his poetry, in his philosophy, and his all his works?
Thank you very much, Ayesha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First of all, thank you, Iqbal Salahuddin Sahab, for wonderful Persian rendition of his poem. Your Farsi is, it's like Subh-e Irani, so I was thoroughly impressed by your rendition of Farsi. And Professor Malik, thank you very much. I mean, you're an academic, of course. There's a lot of difference between a journalist and an academic. I remember a quote from George Bernard Shaw saying, the problem with journalism is that they cannot differentiate between a cycle accident and collapse of a civilization. So it's a very difficult task. So my answer would not, of course, match your intellect and your understanding, in-depth understanding of this subject, but I totally agree that Iqbal was a universalist and internationalist who took things from everywhere around the world to create or propose a vision for future, in which he, of course, he was inspired by Islam and its teachings, but at the same time, he hated or he detested and loathed different instruments and institutions of exploitation, whether it was capitalism or mullahism or the institution of mullahs, or even Sufis, when he questions them in one of the Persian couplet, I remember, Biyob Majlis-e Iqbal yak du sagar cash, agar chisar na tarashad kalandari donam. Come to the company of Iqbal and have a couple of goblets. Although I have not shaved my head, I know what kalandari is. So I absolutely feel that it is important to understand that it would not be great to confine Iqbal to Pakistan or his idea. But coming back to the question, from a journalistic point of view, Ayesha, first of all, one would like to imagine what if Iqbal had lived to see Pakistan. Again, my apologies if I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic on the subject. Would he have been declared as a traitor in Pakistan like Fatima Jinnah was once declared? What would have been the reaction of the same mullahs who opposed the very idea of Pakistan as against Islam, particularly a particular Deoband sect? Deoband said, it was Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madani rahmatullah Allah said, the idea of separate homeland was against Islam. And then others, from Sajjada Nishins to others who actively supported British in their efforts from 1857, actively chasing those who were freedom fighters, giving men and material and other support against those who fought the British, to even up to 1947, when they were receiving favors from the colonial masters. So where would have they placed Iqbal? And then, of course, the people who grabbed power, as Professor Malik said, and created a massive disruption in public faith of the systems that Pakistan has. So I'm not sure if he would have had currency, or he would have had any acceptance in the system that Pakistan has produced so far. So there the answer lies, that has there been any acceptance of his system that he envisaged for Muslims in this part of the world? But having said that, he would have even perhaps been pilloried by the so-called Islamists for their vision, which is full of exclusion of almost everybody, to the extent that sometimes one of my friends, he jokes that if we follow certain ideology, there would be only two people left in the fold of Islam. Either it would be you or me, because we support each other, otherwise none of them. So in that sense, I think Pakistan has not followed much of Iqbal's vision. But what is positive is that there is still receptivity to his ideas. There is a group of people, they might not be in the policy making, they might not be in the positions of power, but certainly an intellectual, Iqbal fired lots of intellectuals, their imagination across various disciplines and realms. That gives Iqbal currency in Pakistan still, although from the government side, I have seen for the last several years, you would see that his vision or his memory is being hollowed out and airbrushed slowly, to this extent that I don't think we have we used to have Allama Iqbal's holiday in Punjab, and I don't think we have it anymore. Iqbal Salahuddin Sahab will bear me out if I'm wrong, or maybe he might want to add. So these memories are very important. Symbolism is also very important. If we don't hold these things and slowly airbrush this memory and his vision, or also fall into the trap of being reductive, as Professor Malik was saying, that if we reduce Iqbal to a particular confine of his thought, which he was not. He was such a giant of a person who would talk, and very freely he would talk. He would even remember Ram, the Indian icon of Hindutva, saying, "Hai Ram ke wujud pe Hindustan ko naaz ahle nazar kehte hain, jisko Imam Hind." And then he will talk about Karl Marx as well as a prophet, kind of a prophet. So his intellect and his ideas were so much open and embracing of different cultures, while at the same time, without compromising one's own Muslim identity and bringing various elements of Islamic history together and situating them in present for the people in subcontinent also and others. So he was therefore, it would not be proper to reduce him to particular area and ideology, but we could see if, say, for example, if there hasn't been much progress of Iqbal's force or his vision in Pakistan, but it has not failed. It has fired imagination of hundreds of millions of Muslims across the world, as Professor Malik was saying, in Central Asia. I remember visiting Iran a few times where they call him Iqbal-e-Lahori. He is revered for his ideas and visions. Iqbal has fired the imaginations of Turks and Central Asia. I remember being in Central Asia a few years back, and people do talk about him, intellectuals, etc. So and Iqbal was a universalist. And as a Muslim, I think the way I have understood Islam, and thanks greatly to Iqbal's vision and his ideas, a Muslim cannot be confined to a particular geography or a particular ideas in that sense. So Iqbal's vision is very powerful today as it was when he was around, regardless of the failures at a very local, small level of South Asia or Pakistan. It might have floundered for whatever reasons, but it still continues to inspire new generations. And what is important is to rediscover him and rediscover his understanding of it, but also the understanding with passion. You know, Iqbal himself says, "Ahle maktab hai mabahis ke khamo page mein gum. Soze dil, soze jigar, soze yaqeen hai mahfood." So passion is very important for Iqbal. It's not just an intellectual exercise for the sake of it, but at the same time, acceptance and respect for other symbols and other faiths and non-faiths as well, like he talks about Karl Marx. So I just seen a message from Mian, so I would like to end it here and say thank you very much.
Okay, I'd like to move on to Mian Iqbal Salahuddin sir, and I'd just like to ask you one question before we move on to questions from the house. Were Iqbal's philosophical giveaways aligned with Quaid-e-Azam's ideology? Were they incorporated into the constitutional framework of Pakistan? Because here we have two leaders, two architects of Pakistan movement. One is giving us the vision, another is striving for achieving that vision. And we seem to think that they must be aligned. But then there are those who think that no, their visions are not aligned, and there are some who project them to be completely opposite to one another. So if you would like to shed some light on that.
Well, if you look at the history, I mean, like, 1915 when Allama wrote Asrar-e-Khudi, and at the end of that book, he makes an invocation to God to grant him a comrade and a confidant whom he could kind of, like carve the idol himself and, breathe his own spirit into that personality. And till like, again, you see in 1930 when he made the Allahabad address, I think in the opening paragraph, he stated that I lead no party and I follow no leader. So till that time, Iqbal was not in alignment with like Quaid-e-Azam in the way it became later. But in the same, Khutbah Allahabad, Allama said that these great leaders they are gifts of God and they are not made to order. And if you read his letter in 1937, which he addressed to Quaid-e-Azam, he wrote to him that he is the only Muslim in India to whom the Muslims of the subcontinent can look up for safe guidance. So it was, I think, after 1930, a few years even later than that, that they were kind of completely on the same page. And if you read Quaid-e-Azam's statements, which he made on various Iqbal days, and he has admitted that they were like, their thoughts were completely in consonance with each other. And after that, it was like Iqbal, in his own words, he was like an ordinary soldier of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he stood behind him like a rock. And eventually, Iqbal had died in 1938 when this Pakistan Day resolution event took place on the 23rd of March. Quaid-e-Azam is on record. He turned around to his secretary, Syed, and he said that if Iqbal was alive today, he would have been happy to know that we have done exactly what he would have wanted us to do. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that they had their differences. They opposed one another also, especially during the time when there was a split between the Muslim League on the issue of separate electorates, which Sir Muhammad Shafi and Allama Iqbal were not willing to compromise upon. And but later on, I think Iqbal realized, or it was shown to him that it's only Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah who can lead the Muslims, and it was going to be none other than him.
Thank you very much. One question any one of the panelists can answer. Dr. Sir Allama Muhammad Iqbal. This very statement says so many things about the personality that we're talking about today. And looking at him, his vision, it's such a holistic vision that was rare in his era. And due to being direct effectees of colonialism for so long, many of the scholars of subcontinent, they had a bias against the West somewhere or somehow or the other. Whereas Iqbal seemed to be critical, and at the same time he's rational, and his all his thoughts are grounded in logic, and they're very futuristic as well. So if Allama Iqbal was alive today, in the Pakistan of today, thinking about Dr. Sir Allama, what would he have been labeled as today? Like Professor Malik very easily called him a liberationist. Would he have been, could he have continued to be a liberationist today? Would he have been labeled as a rightist or a leftist, or what would he have been labeled as?
I don't want to brand him because that will not be fair. But
okay, let me rephrase the question. Just looking at this very what he was able to achieve in his life, Dr. Sir Allama, what would he be positioned as in Pakistan of today?
Well, I think Pakistan and in the Muslim world, there was no single Muslim country who could be called independent. Maybe Turkey to some extent. Mustafa Kemal was able to, sort of safeguard Anatolia and parts of European, Ottoman Empire, Europe's part of empire. But otherwise, there was no single Muslim country at that time. So at one level, I would say Muhammad Iqbal would be happy that Muslims have, 54 plus countries. Secondly, I think Muhammad Iqbal would be very happy that there are universities, people talking about them, people differing. There is some kind of tradition of critical discourse and debate happening. Of course, he would be disturbed with the way violence has been happening in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, mostly this violence being committed by Muslims against fellow Muslims. He would have been deeply disturbed about Kashmir, his native Kashmir. And in Bosnia, I thought, when in 1990, sadly, Yugoslavia fell apart, in Bosnia, Muslims all of a sudden, they developed their interest, renewed their interest in Muhammad Iqbal and the movement for Pakistan. I could see I did a book on Bosnia as well. I could see parallel between Pakistan movement after 1930s and 40s and what Bosnia was going through in the 1990s. And they have Allama Iqbal chair there. But let's not isolate Allama Iqbal from all the other work which he inherited. People like Syed Ahmad Khan, who was the founder of Islamic modernism in India. And, you know, of course, his writings and his educational work through Aligarh University. And then I think Jamaluddin Afghani, who talked about the Muslims, you know, all over the world. I mean, many people reduce him to what we call pan-Islamism, but he was a modernist in his own way. He was trying to marry tradition and modernity within the Islamic context. So like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, he wanted to empower Muslim. And very importantly, not many people know this, that when Allama Iqbal came here to Britain, he was part of Anjuman Islamia. No study has been done on Anjuman Islamia. And he worked with Sayyid Amir Ali. And Sayyid Amir Ali was a great cosmopolitan Muslim, a great scholar, a great writer, a great intellectual, a great educationist. And when he was writing his second book, Allama Iqbal, as a student, was helping Sayyid Amir Ali. So in that sense, I think Allama Iqbal is part of that tradition of reconstructive thinking. Look at the title of his lectures, the reconstruction of religious thought. So this is where I think he inherits this tradition of Jamaluddin Afghani and Nawab Abdul Latif from Bengal and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and many other contemporaries. And then he works with Sayyid Amir Ali. And like Sir Syed Amir Ali, he was, he talked of Ummah, he talked of a greater, Muslim identity. So I would feel that at one level he will be disturbed by anybody else, but at another level he would say that at least colonialism has gone. I think he would be disturbed by the cultural and intellectual colonization of Muslim mind. So whether people would call him a professor or philosopher or Allama or doctor, I think Iqbal would remain relevant and would always remain relevant. And I think, when you read Iqbal, I mean, in your private moments, whether you read his poetry or you read, his lectures, or you read his PhD thesis, which he did at Munich, because there was no PhD, kind of qualification available at that time in Britain. So he went to Munich, he learned German at Heidelberg University, and he submitted this thesis on metaphysics in Persia. So, and it was published in India in 1907. Not many people talk about it. So I think we need to study Iqbal in a holistic way. The way Iqbal, if he comes back, would look at the Muslim world and would look at the West and would look at the hegemony that the modern Western, civilization and culture has. But I think he might be disturbed with Westernization, but he would not be disturbed with modernization. We have to differentiate between modernization and Westernization. He would look at China because he could see Chinese history taking a new turn. He would look at Japan as another example, inspiration for Muslims. So I think Iqbal would have mixed feelings if he were alive today. And he would keep on inspiring people, like I said, in Iran, or in Bosnia, or in Turkey, or in North Africa, or in diaspora amongst Muslims. Lots of Muslims are interested in studying Islam because we are confronted with these issues. We have inherited those issues, relationship between modernity and tradition. So I think in that sense, Iqbal remains very relevant.
Okay, thank you. And Pakistan has an importance because of being a model state. It was supposed to be a model state, a testing ground for the principles of Islam, and it was supposed to be a torchbearer for the Ummah and for the whole world. So we are looking at it in that perspective. Otherwise, of course, we don't want to confine Iqbal or his thoughts or visions to this subcontinent or even to Pakistan. So I think we can open the house for questions. There are many people who want to ask, and I think they could be allowed to ask directly.
Sure.
Or I think, Mizan, you could lead the questions. Yeah.
As you can see from the chat. Do you want to read out from the chat, or do you want me to?
No, I think you can do that.
Okay, so before we take the questions on the Zoom, the people on the Zoom, so let me just read out some of the questions that have come through. One from Rizwan: why didn't Iqbal compose poetry in Punjabi, which was his mother tongue? Another one. Sorry, I'm just going through it. Professor Iftikhar, how can you achieve this in current days when we still have visa jurisdictions and Sunni Shia conflicts, even between Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan? I think he's talking about, you know, the differences between Sunni Shia issues. That's from Bilal Mustafa. Another one, very quickly, who are the three best alamas of the Muslim world today, according to you, for Professor? So we start off with those three, and then we'll move on to the direct Zoom. So any of our panelists, Ayesha, it's up to you.
No, it's up to the panelists, actually, whatever their preference is.
Come on.
I think
Professor Saab, Shibli Saab.
Yeah, I think.
I've been talking quite a bit, but I would say that Allama Yusuf Ali is another one, Allama Iqbal, and of course there were people in Central Asia and Ottoman Empire and in Egypt who were talking about similar issues like Muhammad Abduhu. So I would consider these people to be part of the same tradition. About Punjabi language, I think we shouldn't be parochial. As I said at the very beginning, we should not look at Iqbal from our own sort of territorial, partisan kind of lens. I think Iqbal was very universal. He had no problem in writing English. And it's a wonderful English that he wrote. Look at, he didn't have access to all those books and everything like we have today. And he wrote excellent Persian. I mean, when you go to Iran, the way they take pride, as Murtaza Bhai was saying, they call him Iqbal Lahori. And his Persian in Central Asia. So I think we should not really make into an issue. About Shia Sunni thing, I would say Iqbal always talked about Islam, which he called civil society, based on civic respect, tolerance. So I think this is where, again, a kind of emphasis on ritualism and emphasis on differences. I think this is what has, broadened the gulf between Shias and Sunnis and amongst all other sects. So I think this is where Iqbal becomes, when I looked at him in Iran, I see Shia in Iran appropriate him the way many Sunnis in Turkey or Pakistan or elsewhere appropriate. So he himself, I think, is a bridge. Now, as you talk about the differences between Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, they're political, sadly, the way there were differences in Europe. Look, most horrible wars of the 20th century happened in Europe. First World War, Second World War, and the Holocaust. So at one level, they do depress Iraq and Iran fighting for 10 years. But if our civil societies, if our debates and our academic exchanges and our literary musings help us, and if our common heritage like Persian aid or Islamic aid and our attitude towards modernity could empower us, I think we could go beyond these statist restrictions.
Janab Mian Iqbal Saab, would you like to comment?
I think it has been a very serious issue, the Shia and the Sunni issue in our
because when we read
history,
the Jawab al-Shikwa,
and it has,
and then we see the tensions, and then he talks about that, about the differences of the sects as well. What are your thoughts?
Of course, I mean, you cannot negate those differences even till today. But I look at it differently. Like, even though the Shias and Sunnis have fought against each other over the centuries, and because of that, the Muslim empires suffered over the last many centuries. But if you look at the modern times, I'm Qaid Azam. We belong to the Shia faith, and Iqbal was a Sunni. I mean, they completely stood on the same platform, and they set an example for the Muslims of the subcontinent that they can stand together, and when they stand together, they were able to deliver Pakistan.
So it's more of an economical sort of approach to religion as opposed to a sectarian dogmatic position.
It's more like, I would say, like Dr. Javed Iqbal writes that there's a difference between the word mazhab and deen. Mazhab is something which is, this is what our theologians differentiate also. when you translate these two words into like English, and they just come out like in the form of one word, like religion, and it loses its difference. So mazhab is more like a personal viewpoint,
Right.
and deen is like those sets of principles of Islam which are applicable to the entire humanity. And I think both these personalities, they stood by each other on the basis of deen. Otherwise, they both had their personal views. I was listening to a very interesting video of a late Ahle Hadith Maulana Ishaq, in which he was narrating an instance of Qaid-e-Azam, that he was confronted by a Congressy mullah who said that I will not vote for you because you are a Shia. And Qaid-e-Azam replied, okay, Mr. Gandhi is a Pakka Sunni, you better go and vote for him. So it just shows that, this division, Murtaza Sahib has absolutely been correct when he has, explained this division. It still exists today. I would like to say that Iqbal is like a fellow professor of mine. He put it very aptly that Iqbal is alive today in Pakistan because of his own power, his own force, or because of how people perceive him to be as an Ashiq-e-Rasool.
Right.
Otherwise, no government or the establishment has spared anything to kind of, get him out of the course and the curriculum and everything.
Sure.
We have done the same thing with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. He's been totally taken out. I mean, he's one of the most important personalities. If Sir Syed wasn't there, people like Iqbal and Jinnah would not have been the way they were.
Right.
Muslims would have really been backward in terms of education. Right.
Murtaza bhai, would you like to add anything to the...
Let me add a question for Murtaza and then he can answer if you allow. Yeah. Okay. We're looking at two models of government. We are looking at a theocratic state, and as against that, we're looking at a secularist, liberalist democracy, or whatever one may call it. So I would just like to know that, is the Pakistan of today the safe haven for minorities that Qaid-e-Azam elaborated upon? And at the same time, we need to look at, is India of today the liberal democracy that was to ensure and safeguard rights of all its citizenry as envisioned by Gandhi? So with these two questions, Murtaza Saab, please go ahead and answer whichever one you feel like answering.
Thank you. I see a difference between India and Pakistan in a sense that India had a stated secular goal about its destination. Pakistan was somewhat reluctantly Islamic, without much understanding or without much of a work plan or direction, so to speak. But there's a difference between India and Pakistan because I've lived in both countries for quite a while. I see that in India, after 1947, India being secular, if we see there are pogroms, anti-Muslim pogroms, cyclical violence, state-assisted violence. And it has happened right from 1947. I don't remember, my memory fails at the moment. As I was talking to you the other day as well, what the reason for that. There must have been, if my memory doesn't fail me too much, more than 60,000 anti-Muslim riots in India. Riot is a misnomer, it's pogroms, but some small, some very big, like we have Meerut, Malyana, Hashimpura, coming to Gujarat, and so many others, and recently New Delhi. What I find is surprising that it doesn't mean that minorities in India, in Pakistan, don't have issues, but I don't see there's a concerted, deliberate government effort or structural violence against minorities in Pakistan, except for Qadianis. They have been directed, targeted for something different, but then we can discuss that some other time. But the issue here is that in Pakistan, say for example, it's very easy for me, if I was a Hindu in India, sitting anywhere, I could rake hatred against Muslims and claim votes, and people will support me. It's not just uneducated folks. It would be very educated, middle-class people with cushy jobs. They will support me, finance me. This is a very common occurrence. If I was to stand in Lahore somewhere and claim that, oh, vote for me or give me money because I'm going to kill some Hindus or Sikhs or Christians, people will first of all think I'm insane. There isn't such acceptance at public level against violence, for violence against minorities in Pakistan. Whereas in India, acceptance is everywhere. It was not that it had public acceptance all the time, but it was tolerated during Congress regimes, because we see lots of violence against Muslims, including attack on Babri Masjid and then opening it for idol worship during Rajiv Gandhi's time, and now Congress openly accepting it. Or, for example, in Kashmir, if we talk about Jammu and Kashmir on the Indian side, the first biggest genocide of Muslims happened in Jammu in 1947, in which more than 200,000 to up to perhaps 400,000 Muslims were killed in Jammu, and then about more than 500,000 were forced to relocate to different sites of Pakistan. In Kashmir, it didn't happen. In Pakistan, in Punjab, anti-Hindu violence or anti-Sikh violence happened. But we don't see this happening cyclically, as if there are instances of innocent mob violence in Pakistan against Christians, for example, or there are reports of abductions of Hindu girls in Sindh particularly, but there isn't, we can't say it's a pattern. And the worst thing is the violence against Hindus in Pakistan, whatever little and sporadic instances have happened, these come under supposedly secular People's Party, Pakistan People's Party. We don't see it across in other parts of Pakistan. So regardless whether Pakistan failed anybody, Pakistan failed, in my opinion, everybody who was poor, including Muslims, and then everybody else. But there isn't any effort directed particularly against any minority, except for the Qadianis. There's quite an issue, because but here also, when we see the declaration of Qadianis as non-Muslims, I was surprised to know that there was a massive debate in National Assembly that went on for a long time, and I downloaded that document, which goes on for perhaps 1,200 pages or so, very long A4 pages, A4 size. But in India, it is obvious what's happening in India against Muslims. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from the chat, yes, please.
Yeah, okay, so let me just bring the first person to Mohammed Bilal. I'm just going to unmute you, so if you can be ready. Yep, Bismillah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Bilal. I'm an international student studying here in the West. I first of all really want to say thank you to all three of you. You really brought up some interesting points. Now for my question that I had, it was as in academic light, could you shed some shed some more information on Iqbal's political philosophy, like in the parliamentarian system, versus the emergence of new political Islamic philosophies such as that of Dr. Israr and others in the later 1900s? I just wanted to understand the differences between those two, or if there is any difference, and what is the common points between those two in academic light.
Okay, Professor Malik, I think you would like to.
Yeah.
All right. This chap, Dr. Iqbal Singh Seva, he actually did his PhD here in Oxford on political philosophy of Iqbal. So I would first of all invite you, Bilal, to have a look at it, though I'm a bit uncomfortable because it again goes back to the 19th century Muslim history in reference to Deobandi and Barelvi. thought, and also talks about Ahmadis. But there were lots of other people writing about these issues. Indian Islam or Islam in India, and how do you relate with other organizations and communities, and how you relate with the challenges and the opportunities that modernity had produced. And it sort of looks at Iqbal only as a political philosopher, but of course he was a political philosopher, and that's your area. Iqbal Iqbal Singh Seva, a very interesting man. I knew him, and now he's teaching in America. His grandfather was fond of Allama Iqbal. His grandfather's name was Hukam Singh. He named his grandson after Muhammad Iqbal. And this Iqbal Singh, when he published his book with Cambridge University Press, he dedicated it to grandfather and saying, look, you named me after this famous poet. And look, I've published a book on it based on my PhD. So I think that will be a good book to read. And then also Iqbal's own ideas, about, for example, he says in one of the lectures, quote, the Republican form of government is not only thoroughly consistent with the spirit of Islam, but has also become a necessity in view of new forces that are set free in the world of Islam. And this is where most of the Muslim countries have failed this test, that they have not been able, sadly, to establish democratic government. And when Murtaza Bhai was talking about India, I was reminded of this story, which Doris Ahmed, the governess, the German lady at Iqbal's household in the 1930s wrote, that when Pandit Nehru came to visit Allama Iqbal, he refused to sit in a chair. He said he would sit on the floor in front of this man, Muhammad Iqbal, that he had known since their days in Cambridge. So there was great respect for Muhammad Iqbal from people like, Jawaharlal Nehru. So I would say that, that was the concept with people like Jinnah and Iqbal and Nehru and Gandhi. They all share that we'll get rid of colonialism and we'll resolve our issues through negotiation, and our people will be empowered. And that's where I think Iqbal was talking about, Republican form of government. And he was not comfortable with this idea of pan-Islamism because he knew that there are all kinds of traditions, divisive and diverse. First, Muslims would have to gain independence. They would have to develop their institutions, not in conflict, but in cooperation with modernity. And they would have to empower their people. And then they would build up the bridges, something that Europe has been doing, something which Southeast Asia has been doing. But when you look at the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, we are the three regions where there is no regionalization. Every neighbor is fighting with a neighbor. I think that is where Iqbal would have been very much depressed to see the contemporary state of 54 Muslim states. So I think your question is very valid, that we need to go back to Muhammad Iqbal, and especially when we talk about political philosophy. And that is where I think his idea of empowering people and getting rid of monopolies, whether it's a feudal monopoly or any other kind of monopoly. I think this is where he talks about khudi, like Iqbal Salahuddin was saying, that his first book, Asrar-e-Khudi, which came out in 1915. Khudi in an individual sense is self-confidence. But khudi, when you talk of a community together, whether it's a community or it's a country, it's ego, that the country picks up, the commonality and the confidence. And then he goes through all those other publications and lectures. And then the last book was Javetnama, which is a kind of summary or magnum opus of Allama Iqbal. So I think discussing Iqbal, you would be discussing idea of democracy, empowerment, land reforms, education, empowerment of all kinds of plural communities, not just Muslim. I think this is where Iqbal's political philosophy will become very relevant for all of us.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
For this young gentleman's knowledge. Dr. Israr freely quoted Iqbal in his speeches and whatever, how he was an extremely good orator, and he was extremely well versed in Allama's poetry. But one thing, if you want to comprehend Allama's thought in its totality, you cannot just base the thought of his all of his thought on the basis of his poetry only. Poetry, it gives you an idealism. It hits your heart, it hits your soul. But the way to realizing that idealism is that you have to read the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. Without reading the reconstruction and Allama's prose, his knowledge about his thought will be incomplete. And unfortunately, when Dr. Israr Ahmad quoted Iqbal, and then he's a very strong preacher of the Muslim Caliphate in this day and age. And the problem with Dr. Shah was that he was not well versed on the reconstruction lectures. So that is why there was, although he propagated Iqbal, but there was a kind of a major difference between the thinking of the two when it came to the political form of government.
That could be a debatable issue and would require another, I think, whole session, because people of following Dr. Israr, they claim that he derived his philosophy from that philosophy of form of political party from Allama Iqbal's vision.
No, there is no doubt about it. But the thing is that if you neglect a part of Iqbal's thought, like if you consider Javeed Nama to be his magnum opus, I would say that the reconstruction is like another magnum opus. Mm. So you cannot ignore it, not under any circumstances or at any cost at all.
Okay.
Ayesha, I would beg to differ with people who would.
If you let me know how much time we have.
We're going to continue for the next half an hour. We've got a lot of questions by race.
Then I think you should allow people to ask the questions.
Sure. I've got Sufyan Dogra, if you would like to ask your questions. I've just unmuted you. Bismillah.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. This was fascinating to hear this fantastic thought. My name is Sufyan Dogra. I work for NHS in England and I'm an anthropologist. My question would be to respectable Professor Iftikhar Sahib. As you mentioned that Iqbal might have been resented on the fact of continuity of colonialism in intellectual and cultural sense. And that shapes a lot of the modern works which have been done on Iqbal in the last 30, 40 years in particular. They are done by those people who, let's say, normalize the Western liberal academic philosophical tradition. And in that tradition, they have this tunnel vision of looking at Iqbal, ignoring many other factors. Now, if Iqbal were with us today, what remedy or solution or commentary he would have for us to move away from a normalization of Western liberal ethos or cultural and colonially intellectual, let's say, slavery, particularly the academics?
Very good question.
Well, I would say that a similar question was asked from Professor Amartya Sen, the famous economist from Bengal. And, there's poverty, there's exploitation. And his answer was, educate women. I'm sure Iqbal would have a similar answer. Education, especially education of women. I know that class formation as it happened under the colonial rule created those new hegemonies. Whether you look at Pakistan or Egypt or other places, even Turkey, how military becomes very powerful, and how in many cases religion and religious groups, clerics, are co-opted, and then critical thinking and debate or equal citizenship are denied to the people. And how do you fight that? I think you can't fight it with Kalashnikov. I think you will fight it with argument. And for argument, you need education. The second solution that many sociologists offer is that maybe, Max Weber kind of thesis, that you develop a middle class. And that middle class provides stability to the societies, to these countries, becomes the stakeholder in politics, in economy, in education. So maybe in the Muslim world, We have few people who have got lots of power, who are very rich, and we've got lots of people who are poor. So maybe we still need to go through this period of transition. I call it a period of transition, where we see lots of authoritarianism in the name of politics, in the name of religion. So maybe we are heading towards a kind of middle class, stature in Muslim societies, and this middle class could redefine, these countries, and perhaps eventually we'll see those processes happening in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in South Asia, that we have seen in Southeast Asia, that we have seen in Europe. So that regionalization and getting rid of hegemony, I think these are 2-3 interrelated things that I find, very much needed. And this is happening in India as well. I mean, maybe India at one level, you could say there is a huge middle class, but then this middle class is very much, sectarianized, and, the BJP and that kind of politics. So perhaps in the Muslim world, middle class could become, the pillars of civil society, who will talk of civil rights. I mean, when Jinnah, for example, Quaid-e-Azam gave his famous speech on the 11th of August, 1947, he was talking about religion being a government, state being neutral when it came to religion, protecting the weaker elements and acknowledging the stronger element. But at the citizenship level, they were all going to be equal. I think that was the concept of Quaid-e-Azam, which has been reduced to secularism or liberalism versus Islam. And I think that was very similar to what Nehru actually believed in India, and he tried to practice that state would like to stay neutral. In India, they use the term, they in the constitution, they put secularism, as one of the cornerstones of the government, policy. In Pakistan, I think Jinnah's ideas were similar, but he avoided using the word secularism because he knew that it could become a very volatile term. But basically, the role of religion the role of the state vis-a-vis religion will be neutral, rather they will be protecting, smaller and vulnerable communities.
Thank you. Okay, Janab Mian, would you like to comment on that question?
I think Professor Saab has elaborated on it very well.
Fantastic. Okay, we're just going to move to the next person. Shah Nawaz, I'm just going to unmute you now. Professor Nawaz, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. My question, as Mian Iqbal Salahuddin Sahab has said, Allama Iqbal is still alive today. As I know Allama Iqbal from my school days, when we were observing Iqbal days during high school level. So we were preparing the lectures on Iqbal and learning about it. But the present generation, as I am teaching this time to the youth, and I'm involving myself with the youth and present generation. So what will be the best way to teach them a philosophy of Iqbal and idea of Iqbal?
That's actually a very difficult question to answer, because you see, the thing is this, that like the previous gentlemen have also elaborated on how Iqbal is being studied. I mean, it's happening all at like a personal level. It's not at the government level. And like Allama has stated somewhere, he said that, it is the form of government which determines the character of the people. And that's not happening in Pakistan, at least. I mean, if you see over the years, I mean, excessive military rule, and then, different types of governments, they have all contributed to the development of, the nature or the character of the young generation in different ways. And it has not turned out to be, I would say, a very kind of a happy state that we are in today, or like we see our young generation in today. So the only way you will, like, I would like to say that, if it's my understanding or how the way I've studied and understood Iqbal, is that there is an inherent uh, you know, a revolution and rebelliousness in his thoughts and his teaching. And if anyone has not understood that, then he has not understood Iqbal at all. This is my viewpoint. What I mean to say is, with thoughts like this, it does not suit the governments to promote such thoughts in the younger generation. Like Professor Saab has said that, it will come into the middle class someday. It has to come into the middle class. My paternal grandfather's family was a very rich family. So I have seen the elite of this country as well as the middle class also. And I associate with like people at all levels of the society. If you want to make Pakistan a great nation, if you have to take the politics out of the existing elite, you have to take the middle class has to step forward. That's difficult. It's not going to happen like, with prayers only. You have to make a conscious effort. But if you want to make Pakistan like, according to the concept of Iqbal or Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, then that is the way forward which they would have done for us. And how that is going to happen, it can only happen when it becomes a kind of a strong and a powerful kind of a movement from the middle classes and the low classes who want such kind of ideology to be imposed. And of course, your education system has to be changed, because your education system doesn't cater to anything. I have studied from Ayesha College, Lahore, and I tell you, I'm alive to admit without any regrets, I didn't learn anything from that college, from that institution, with its big name and everything. I was not taught about Jinnah, I was not taught about Iqbal, or I was not taught about our history or anything at all. And that's way how your entire system is like. So the thing is this, that Iqbal's thought is revolutionary, and it's something I don't know. It's nobody's going to do it. Who the people in power? How do you expect them to cut off their own hands? It doesn't work like that. So it's all like, on the 14th of August, 9th of November, 25th of December, you put Iqbal and Quaid-e-Azam on pedestals, and you show them in the people, and you say that you promote their ideology. Well, this is certainly not, that's like hypocrisy, I would say, nothing else.
Okay, one good thing could be done, Iqbal Sahab, if you would like to do that. We could get academics from all across the globe who have done work on Iqbal's philosophy, and you could get them together to devise a course on Iqbaliyat. We don't have such a course. We don't know how to teach Iqbal. We don't know how to incorporate Iqbal into our syllabi, but it could be done. We could get together and do that.
It can be done at the personal level, yes, in the private schools. They have the...
No, let's just not think where it's going to be implemented for now. You can start developing the course, and we'll just see where we're going to implement it at a later stage. Maybe some later generations might come and do that. Okay, so if we know how much time we have, I'd like to ask each a closing question.
Sure.
Or if there's some question, okay.
Shafa Dwani, I'm just going to unmute you. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Shafa Dwani from India, Kashmir. Just a lot of questions to ask. I know we're running short of time, but just a joke. Since I did my graduation from AMU, there's a famous joke by John Elia that Pakistan Aligarh ke londo ki sharti, given the kind of support that Aligarh gave to the Muslim League during the early 20th century, So before, I have a couple of questions. I'll ask my first question to Professor Iftikhar Syed. Uh, I'm doing my assignment these days on idea of national state and the debate between Maulana Madani and Iqbal on while Maulana Madani promoting the idea of Muttahida Qawmiyat, composed nationalism on one side, and Iqbal pushing the idea of millat and all these things. Right. So I'm reading Muttahida Qawmiyat or Islam by Madani these days. One of the interesting things I could see is that like national state and a state to Indian subcontinent was a new phenomenon. So can we say this thing that two kind of things were happening simultaneously, an ijtihad in a two-way. So one ijtihad was by Iqbal, who was conceptualizing things beyond the idea of territorial nationalism, the idea of confederation of states and all these things. And then Maulana Madani chipping in idea of how to reconcile with the nation state and how to be in a composed nationalism. That gives intellectual foundation for Muslims in India, for the idea of India. I just want to ask, like, while Halak has done an important work on modernity and all these things, who is a professor at Columbia and all, and who says that, any kind of state, any kind of polity that in the current paradigm of modernity is a critique of modernity, and current paradigm of modernity is impossible. Whether that's state polity conceptualized by the communist ideals, whether that's a polity conceptualized by the Islamic ideals or Muslim ideals, whatever you call it. How do we see it? How do we reconcile it? And even though Iqbal is conceptualizing a new territory, conceptualizing confederation of states, but then how is this happening in already national state, in an already different kind of world, via a different kind of polity, while a different kind of polity is being conceptualized, and how will it operate in that paradigm? That's my one question. Then my second question is to Murtaza Shibli. Talked about a lot of comments and all these things, and comments on Dr. Israr and all these things. So I would like to ask you, like, Iqbal in his reconstruction of religious thought in Islam is where he, as Professor Iftikhar Saab says, Iqbal is conceptualizing something between tradition and modernity, a kind of a middle path. But Iqbal in his reconstruction is also conceptualizing a new ijtihad, but at the same time is very conscious of European experience. What led to the Reformation in Europe? What was the byproduct of the secularization process? And he outrightly mentions it. And then talking about, he called Karl Marx a prophet, but then he said materialism without spirituality is almost nothing. So in that sense, how do you see it and how do you conceptualize it? And my end question to Mian Iqbal Sahab would be that, what was Iqbal's connection to Kashmir vis-a-vis its developing the consciousness among Kashmiris for the freedom and all these things, and especially forming Majlis-e Anjuman-e Islamiyya and its role in Kashmir. And then, because we had 1931 is one of the important events in Kashmir scene, and then subsequently 1947 as well. But Majlis Ahrar Committee and Majlis Anjuman Islamiyya by Iqbal and all, they were already pushing, pushing the conscious narrative in Kashmiris and all that. So how do we conceptualize this as well?
Thank you so much. Brilliant question. A future leader I can see in the making. So over to Professor Malik, and after that.
Wani Saab has asked so many questions. Looks like he is planning to do a PhD on Iqbal and all these three areas.
I am already writing a book chapter on Iqbal.
Yeah, but I think the idea of nationalism is very tricky, because Gellner has his own view, as you know, and Benedict Anderson's definition, imagined community, is widely a consensus point, and some people look at like Kaduri. And so nationalism itself, how we define nationalism in cultural context, political context, is it on the basis of blood relationship? Is it on the basis of historical consciousness? Or is it on the basis of shared history or shared territory? I think all these commonalities do matter when it comes to the idea of nationalism. I think Iqbal picks up some of those, ideas, but I think he stops short of sort of applauding the concept of a state or community based on nationalism. Maybe he's differentiating between nationalism and national liberation. I think he's more interested in getting people together above from their fragmented identities, tribal, caste, class, linguistic, or ethnic, and then seeking independence, and then deciding their future through a universal empowerment. I think that is where I think Iqbal, when he is so dismissive of territorial nationalism, is very receptive to the idea of national independence for Muslims everywhere. That is where I think his ideology or his philosophy becomes liberationist, not nationalist, but liberationist. Number two, I think he picks up, as Aziz Ahmed talks about it, and Professor Farzana Sheikh has talked about in her first book, that the idea of ijma. Ijma means that there should be consensus. So other than ijtihad, because ijtihad could be individual, but when you're talking about the community, which is colonized or whatever, or even independent, how does it determine its future? That is where Iqbal says that you need ijma. Now, you can't get crores or millions of people together. So how do you do that? Through an assembly or parliament or through election. And this is where I think he liked the idea of Turkish assembly, because that was the earliest assembly which was created in the 1920s by Mustafa Kemal. And he thought that whatever they were saying and whatever decisions they were taking, despite all the nostalgia in India for Khilafat, he went along with those people because he said these are the people who are representing the Turks and they are defining their state. So I think this is where Iqbal is heading to, independence, and then leaving it to the elected body to make all those decisions. Now you asked something else. I think, Aziz Ahmed, Farzana, and several other people have written about it. And more recently, I mentioned already Iqbal Singh, Seva, who has written about Iqbal's philosophy. And I think Iqbal's debate with Maulana Madni, I think was based on the concern. He was not speaking as a Muslim leaguer. I think he was concerned that somehow Islam is being compromised in the name of territorial/nationalist identity. And that's where he differed with Hussain Ahmad Madni. He had no problem with his credentials as a religious scholar. I think he felt that confining Islam under an overarching Indian identity will not be doing favor to Islam itself. And this is where I think you could, as a scholar, you could say that this was a major problem for the Muslims of India. And even today, how do you define yourself as a nation, but then you have all these larger identities, competing identities around you, like India or whatever. How do you relate with them? So at one level, we say Iqbal was the architect of idea of Pakistan. But at another level, perhaps Iqbal, like Jinnah in 1946, when he accepted cabinet mission plan, maybe he thought Muslims should have cultural, political sovereignty in a new India, independent India, a plural India. And that's why W.C. Smith is very important when he published his book, Modern Islam in India, because he came to Lahore to teach at FC College 2 years after Allama Iqbal had passed away. And he observed the Muslim politics. He observed even these smaller parties like Khaksan. And he wrote about Iqbal. And he was worried that this whole idea of territorial identity would not be partition of India. It will be the partition of Muslims. So I think W.C. Smith remains very important. But I'll stop here.
And Murtaza Bhai, and then we'll hand it over to Ayesha.
Thank you very much. Frankly speaking, I totally forgot what the question was, apart from
Shafat, do you want to quickly remind
Shafat, can you quickly check my question for you in the social muscle? I'm just addressing to Shafat.
I was saying this, like Iqbal in Reconstruction talks about Reconstruction, but at the same time, he's also very, he has a keen eye on European experience and then what led to the Reformation in Europe and what was the process of secularization and how things unfolded later in Europe. It went a different direction. And then he talks about Marx. He praised him a lot in Reconstruction, but also say that materialism without spirituality is nothing. So how do you conceptualize it? How do you contextualize it?
I think you questioned Kashmir. You said something about Kashmir as well.
No, he also talked about Ghani, Kashmiri and others. Look, what I understand from Iqbal, I'm not an Iqbal scholar, but what he is, when we talk about Iqbal's ijtihad, it creates some sort of alarm within the religious dominion who try to control this kind of terminology as their own preserve, which is not the case. But what Iqbal said is, Iqbal accepted all the good qualities of tradition, but at the same time with full appreciation of modernity, including those who apparently were not religious per se. So he accepts all these things, and then, but two things are very important. Or three things as Muslim. One is ta'alluq billah, the spirituality. It's very important for Iqbal, and appreciation of diversity as well. He's not reducing these things. But when Maulana Madani was taking what Professor Iftikhar Malik rightly pointed out, Maulana Madani Rahmatullah Allah was being victim of his own understanding of religion in a very narrow geographic context, for example, while as Iqbal's was ek hu Muslim haram ki pasbani ke liye Neel ke sahil se lekar Tabakha ke Kashgar. He talks about the banks of Nile, from the banks of Nile to Kashgar, and that's why he accepts all these people from Marx to modernity to others, but at the same time relates them back to Muslim core of Muslim identity or Muslim practice, as he says, Amal se zindagi, I think he says, Amal se zindagi banti hai jan. So Amal is very important. Spirituality is very important. Well, as I mean, I had a very, I don't want to dwell on that, but I have had very detailed discussions with Maulana Arshad Madani in Delhi, because
Murtaza bhai, I would suggest to you one thing. You should. I have a PDF. I'll forward that to you. You should read Muttahida Qawmiyat in Islam. I disagree with it, but it's actually a very strong critique of what Iqbal was proposing, and he is justifying things from all prism, from grammar, from Quranic discourse, from the discourse of the time, and all that. It's a very strong classical Urdu, but I would suggest you to read it, and then we can have a more discussion on it.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I please do. I have read it long time back, but then I was a very passionate person like you. But now, as I've grown old and bald, I would love to read it again. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Ayesha,
Okay, before people start thinking that Brother Shafat is the chair for today's program, I think I'll take it back from him. So I'm just going to ask quick questions from all of you, and I would just expect quick answers, although this needs sequels to it perhaps to get some conclusions. Okay, both Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa, they seem to be an extension of Ali's famous Musaddas, and both present a systematic study of history, and they present a deep analysis of causes of rise and downfall of civilizations. They present a critique of present situation of Muslims. And what is different is that Allama also foresees the end of era of Western domination. So I'd like Professor Iftikhar Malik Saab to comment on this, that does he see this dichotomy between the East and the West? What is the future of this dichotomy? What does he see as per Iqbal's vision or his own?
Can all the panelists make it very quick, please? Because
I think Allama Iqbal was non-conformist, and I think he wanted Muslims to get out of this state of indolence and lethargy. And this is where I think Shikwa is not just an individual's sort of reminder, but it is a collective thinking amongst this emerging Muslim middle class, which is very much rooted in the traditions, but is also very much exposed to modernity. I mean, many of these people, Allama Iqbal's colleagues and contemporaries, I mean, I already mentioned the senior generation of Syed Amir Ali, but there were people here, like Atiya Faizi. She was the first woman, student from the subcontinent here. And then you had Sir Fazl Hussain, who was from Punjab, founder of the Unionist Party, who got special seats for Muslim students at Government College Lahore. And you had Sir Abdul Qadir. So this younger generation of Muslims here in Cambridge and Oxford, they felt very bad that on the one hand, they could connect with the past, but when they looked at the contemporary situation, Muslims are colonized and lethargic, and in every area, education, politics, and economy, they were very, very much underprivileged. So they wanted to shake them up. So to me, Shikwa is to shake them up through poetry, because this is where, Anjuman-e-Himayat Islam and all these kind of different forums provided Iqbal with a chance to reach out to the people, to shake them up out of this state of lethargy. And this is where I think, when you go to Kartaba, why all these young Muslims, especially in diaspora, like to go to Kartaba? Well, right, they want to connect with Spain because they're part of Europe. Islam is part of Europe, has been part of European history and consciousness, which was chucked out. But now Muslims are reappropriating. But Iqbal did it because he wanted to show that, Iqbal, that modernity and traditions, they're not in conflict. And also, Islam is not foreigner, has not been foreigner to Europe. And number three, he wanted to celebrate history, to empower people. And that's why, rather than going to Makkah, Medina, or Kufa, or, elsewhere, Iqbal then goes to Sicily. And I see lots of, European Muslims going to Sicily, and they read, Iqbal's poems, which he wrote, when he reached Palermo. So I think Iqbal's idea through poetry, which takes a more serious intellectual shape through his lectures, or basically to shake up Muslims, and to raise this self-questioning by giving them examples from their historical past.
Okay, it remains to be seen whether we see the end of Western domination and what happens of the dichotomy of the East and West. But coming to Murtaza, I would like to ask you that is there a possibility of building a Naya Pakistan on Allama Iqbal's vision? Do you see, what is the future that you see? What is the way forward for Pakistan or for this region? Just some closing comments that you might have to say.
There's always change. There's always room for change in building and rebuilding. It is as a Quranic edict. تلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس. I repeat, these days of grief and grace between nations and people. I think the main important thing for Pakistan, rebuilding Pakistan, is what Professor Malik was saying earlier, empowering middle class. The most important thing I personally believe is justice, unless and until people don't get a sense of justice and real justice delivered to them for the underprivileged, normal people who don't count anywhere. It is not possible. But I see some changes, frankly speaking, although I write about things and I'm not a supporter of Imran Khan government on many accounts. But one thing which is very heartwarming is, for the first time, there are some schemes, there are some interventions at the government level, top down, which do give importance to common people and poor people and try to alleviate poverty. And also acceptance of minorities, non-Muslim minorities in Pakistani political culture has become a trend for the last few years, 2, 3, 4 years, which is something very, very acceptable. Even talks about accommodating other problematic minorities with the majority Muslims might have some issues. And also greater dialogue between sectarian, bridging gaps between sectarian differences. So now Pakistan is very much possible. It would be an arduous journey, but I think that way one is very hopeful that social justice, democracy, acceptance of difference and diversity, and Pakistan is very much possible. Thank you.
Okay, last question from Mian Iqbal Salahuddin Saab, that in your opinion, who can lead this vision of Naya Pakistan into a reality? And after that, we'd just like to hear some verses from Allama's poems from you.
I think anybody who is, who has kind of complete knowledge of Allama's vision, and he has the determination and the ability to struggle. And he is kind of, I would say, he rules the hearts of the people by his sheer, presence, his character, his personality, and not by the force of the armed forces or the police or establishment. Only that kind of a person can realize or actualize this kind of idealism, in my opinion. I mean, all the principles, all the paths have been laid down for you. It's just who is going to come and implement it.
Okay, so we need to work on tarbiyat-e-khudi, I think, self-development of the individuals to self-development of the masses to
and the nation
of the leadership as well. Okay, so end with some few verses from Allama's beautiful poetry, please.
I've chosen this poem of Allama's. It's called Nasihat. This gentleman, the teacher, you find this useful. It's basically kind of a nasihat from a Western lord to his son of how to control the population. And unfortunately, it's still the same way. The Farangi has been replaced by a black Farangi. The local Farangis over here. So they, I find this extremely inspiring. And
colonialism is coming back in non-traditional ways, I think.
I think it never left, actually.
Okay.
To a lot of extent. So he says that एक लुर्दे फरंगी ने कहा अपने पेसर से मंजिर वो तलब कर के तेरी आंख ना हो शेर बेचारे के हक में है यही सबसे बड़ा जुल्म बर्रे पे अगर फाश करें कायदाए शेर सीने में रहे राजे मलूकाना तो बेहतर करते नहीं महकूम को तेगों से कभी जेर तालीम के तेजाब में डाल इसकी खुदी को हो जाए मुलायम तो जिधर चाहे उसे फेर तासीर में इक्सीर से बढ़कर है ये तेजाब सोने का हमाला हो तो मिट्टी का है ढेर.
Wow.
Very beautiful. Thank you very much.
Like our present education system is like. So, until you bring changes in that, you're not going to be developing the individual nor the nation as a whole. So it was a pleasure, being here. Thank you for inviting me, and it was a pleasure meeting you, Professor Saab, and Mr. Shibli as well, and all the.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
On the program.
The feeling is mutual. The feeling is mutual.
And Ayesha and everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Ayesha, would you like to close? I'd like to thank everyone, especially Ayesha, Janab Saab, and Professor Iftikhar, Malik, and Murtaza Bhai. Inshallah, sister, I'm going to hand it over to yourself before we close. Just a moment.
I think I've said too much already. And at the end, just like Professor Malik wanted us to celebrate and end off on an optimistic note. So we're going to end off with optimism and zeal. And we're looking forward to a very, very inspiring and we're very hopeful for the future. So our future is going to be bright, inshallah, and we're all going to do our part in making it bright. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Ayesha. Just want to, once again, folks, if you haven't received the link, you'll get a link very shortly. It's been one of our best sessions, longest sessions as well. So take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum.